Alright, so we get to be on the play here. And this hand is pretty awkward just because it's a lot of lands. So we do have the one discard outlet along with the light from the loam. So that is nice. I'm going to keep, just because we can go ahead, play the neonate, discard the loam, start to get some cards into our graveyard. So I'm going to keep on the back of that. Normally with Dredge, a lot of the time I should say, you're missing, your hand's not quite what you'd like it to be. You're hoping to get there, get a little bit lucky. So I'm going to go ahead and take a draw step. And cash in. Now we can cash this in, go for a dredge. So we found 2 more prized amalgams. Interesting. And we can play the light from the loam now. So I'm going to play the Wooded Foothills so we can get that back to our hand. So what we'd really like to hit is some more dredgers to get this chain going further. And now we see an Arbor Elf out of our opponent, so not totally clear what we're playing against. What we are able to do is get this Bloodghast back along with the prized amalgams that are in our graveyard, so that's great. And a lot of times with Dredge, you do just have a hand of all lands. Or mostly lands, at least. And we're seeing that here because of the light from the loam. Now, if we find a conflagrate, we're going to have plenty to do with these lands. We can just throw them at our opponent or at this Arbor Elf or what have you. Now, maybe we're about to see what exactly is going on with our opponent's deck. Now, Faithless Looting would be another good draw off the Dredge because it would give us something to do. Whereas just casting Life from the Loam, it's not that exciting. And so, okay, our opponent's playing a land destruction deck. Well, we have plenty of lands, so not necessarily that annoying. And we found a conflagrate, which is perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and use the conflagrate right now. Our opponent is at 8, and we have exactly 8 cards in our hand. That's perfect. So that means we have lethal here. So we'll be looking for our opponent to probably board in some hate cards after board. The green-red land destruction deck, it's not super popular. I like the thought teases. We're just going to have to make sure that we have lands. We don't want to... Life from the Loam is great, just to be able to continue to bring those lands back from the graveyard. We're going to go ahead and shave some of the usual suspects. A Golgari Thug, Haunted Dead. Sometimes we can take out a Bloodghast, it's fine. And then I like the Collective Brutalities here. And because we're boarding those in, the Neonates can come out. Because the Brutalities, some of the Neonates I should say, because the Brutalities are a discard outlet. And actually, probably board out one conflict right there, but this is fine. Haven't played the matchup a ton. This hand doesn't have a black source. What it does have is a Neonate and Dredge cards along with an Amalgam. So that's enough to keep, I think, because we do have 3 lands, and hopefully we'll try to not to expose some of the more important lands until we need to. So I'm just going to lead on a mountain. So we'll see if maybe our opponent isn't going to immediately start with land destruction. So I'm going to go ahead and sacrifice this Insolent Neonate to hopefully start getting some dredging going. We can get this Narcomoeba back right now. Untap, and now we actually have a Life from the Loam in the graveyard as well, which is attractive, but I'm going to go for the Stinkweed Imp because it's just, we can get the Loam back later, and the Stinkweed Imp is just more cards. And there's a Conflagrate, so that's a nice pickup. So I'm going to cast this Conflagrate to get rid of the Arbor Elf, and then we'll deal our opponent some damage as well. So this should be pretty good because I'm assuming that Arbor Elf was important to our opponent for mana production. And we're also able to get this Prized Amalgam into the graveyard, get the Stinkweed Imps into the yard, and you can see that sometimes with this type of deck, we don't actually care that much about what our opponent's doing. If our opponent, well, so now here's the graveyard hate card, so I take back everything. This is bad for us. Our opponent found the Relic of Progenitus and has put us in a bad spot. We have a Blood Crypt, which we just found. So let's go ahead and use the Thoughtseize in hand. Might as well take a Harmonize, leave those Inferno Titans with our opponent. And this was one of the dangers of going for the play we did, is that if our opponent did have the hate card, which in this case was Relic, then we're left with essentially nothing. And now the Stone Rain. So we were planning to not have that happen, banking on that not happening, and then it did, and now our opponent's in a good spot. Now, we're not out of it. We could still draw something like a Cathartic Reunion to get back in, maybe a Faithless Looting. Okay, so there's the Cathartic Reunion. That's step 1 here. So we can go ahead and Faithless Looting this turn. Unfortunately, there's no more black lands, but we may not need this brutality anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and pitch the Dakmor Salvage and an Archimedes, but yeah, it's not looking great. The Inferno Titans are going to start coming down. Now, that being said, our opponent is down to 8, so maybe we can find a way to squeak this out, but it's not looking good because the Inferno Titan is just such a fast clock. It may even be lethal on the very next turn, so this is going to bring us down to 11. Then our opponent can pump the Titans or even play another Titan. I'm going to dredge this Dakmor Salvage. And because we have no more dredges in the graveyard, I don't think we're going to be able to pull this one out. We can cast a Faithless Looting, but we can't dredge anything. So I'm going to put back a Bloodghast and this Stomping Grounds and play the Dakmor Salvage. So we're taking 9 on the attack. If our opponent has an additional red source, I believe that would be lethal. Okay, it looks like it's going to be casting the other Inferno Titan time. So we're gonna have one turn to see if we can get incredibly lucky. Not even sure what that would require. So let's see. We're gonna pick up this Prized Amalgam. We have this Faithless Looting in hand. So let's go ahead and use that. But unfortunately, having no Dredger is definitely a problem. We can get back the Bloodghast, but yeah, no, we're dead. So, gonna move on to game 3. Being aware of those relics is gonna help, but at the same time, not necessarily gonna change up our sideboarding strategy. We know the matchup. Gonna be on the play here, and pretty solid hand. So once again, Insolent Neonate is gonna kick things off. And we're gonna be able to discard the Stinkweed Imp and use that to start the chain. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that right now. And right away we see 2 Narcomoebas entering play. So we have a nice discard outlet in Collective Brutality, so I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of that card being in our hand. So I'm going to use all 3 modes here. And that's going to mean discarding 2 cards, so it's basically a bonus to get to discard these cards. So it's going to be Conflagrate and Life from the Loam. And so we see exactly what's in our opponent's hand. Not really worried about this sudden shock, so I'm going to take away a Stone Rain. But honestly, neither card is that worrisome. pretty weak hand from our opponent. Not having a relic, not having anything like that. Now, we still have to be worried about potential top-decked relic, but barring that, we should be in a pretty good spot. So, we can dredge the Stinkweed Imp here. So now we get to cast this Life from the Loam and bring back some lands. And we can see there's Faithless Lootings in the graveyard, which we can take advantage of next turn. So if our opponent wants to sudden shock a Narcomoeba, you know, we'll just let that happen. It's not that big of a deal. If our opponent, yeah, it's hard to see what our opponent could go ahead and use a land destruction spell. We're a little bit worried about Inferno Titan coming down, just because that card presents a fast clock. So if this is maybe the Moonvolley Acid Moss, but it looks like it's going to be an Obstinate Bailout. That's interesting. So that's going to allow our opponent to gain some life. And we're going to continue on here. So the question is, which do we want to dredge? And I think it's the Golgari Thug, because the plan is to Faithless Looting this turn and really start loading up the graveyard. So we do have a Stinkweed Imp, which we can grab. And it looks like we found a Bloodghast as well, so that's good news. And we can just put those imps right back where they belong in the graveyard. Now the Prized Amalgams are going to trigger. And it's pretty great spot to be in. So we have 3 Prized Amalgams, 3 Narcomoebas, and a Bloodghast. That's about right for once we've gone through over half our deck. And we can see, looking at the graveyard, we're still missing a Conflagrate, but we have one in hand. So we can potentially pitch that if we feel like we need to win next turn. I guess we could have pitched it to the last looting, but that's okay because we can just go ahead and dig through the rest of our deck if we want to on our next turn, essentially. And our opponent's just in a pickle. No matter what they have. Although, wow, so this is a Bonfire of the Damned. Okay, so that's actually quite good here. That's a miracle if I ever saw one. But you know what? We can still get back most of these creatures. It's not the end of the world. If I had been thinking about that, could have played the Wooded Foothills to potentially end of turn get back the Bloodghast, which would have been way better as it turns out. So 23 cards left in our deck. Let's go ahead and play the Foothills right now. Make sure that the Bloodghast comes back. We have one land left, so it's a Stomping Grounds. And do we want to put it into play untapped? That's the question here. Don't think we need to. No need to lose the life, really. So now I'm going to cast Faithless Looting, Dredging, Stinkweed Imps, and we can put well, we actually found a Conflagrate, so we don't need to discard this one. So we can put those Conflagrates in the graveyard, get this Narcomoeba back. And basically reload our board. So even though that Bonfire was good, we found another Prized Amalgam. We're able to reload the board. And we should be in a good spot with a Conflagrate in the graveyard. We know about our opponent's last card, actually. It's a Sudden Shock, which isn't going to do it for our opponent. We're going to have lethal on our next turn. So I'm not going to dredge. So it doesn't really matter too much how we do this. Could have Conflagrated before attacking, but just going to attack first. If our opponent chumps with the Arbor Elf, that's fine. We can Life from the Loam 2 lands. So yeah, our opponent is going to chump with the Arbor Elf, go to 6, but now we go for Life from the Loam. And so this is going to be lethal. And yeah, this green-red deck just didn't have